Hello, Arbitriers! Welcome to Season 2 of the Arbitrarium. We did it, folks. We made it a full season, and we've already got several episodes lined up, including our new type of episode where we invite special guests to choose a topic to host, while Garrett and I ask questions and we attempt to navigate new and interesting topics beyond either of our wheelhouses. Thanks for listening, and now on to the first episode of our second season, an A La Carte episode attempting to tackle a massive topic in brief. This episode is on the topic of truth. We'll define it, roll around in the rough of it, and hopefully come out with some new insight. Enjoy. Hello, Arbitriers. Welcome back to the Arbitrarium. This is going to be another A La Carte episode. We're going to explore truth. We're going to try to define it in as certain of terms as we can. There's going to be a few definitions for it, and those are going to apply to different situations. But yeah, we're going to kind of dive into that. And
I'm a pragmatist, so truth is pretty easy to figure out for me.
All right, well, let's start with that then. So how do you define truth?
Truth is what works. If it doesn't work, it's not true.
Okay.
Because that's what pragmatism is all about.
Mm-hmm. It's utility.
If it has no utility... I
consider myself a pragmatist as well.
If it has no utility, it must be discarded.
That's too far for me.
It does not fit under the umbrella of truth. It cannot be considered truth unless it works.
Okay, you're going to run into some problems with that definition of truth, because there are very likely things that we can't access as humans that are the case. So it's not going to have any utility to us, but it is still how things operate. As an example, there are things that we don't understand about how the universe operates. Just because we don't understand them doesn't mean they aren't relevant. Right? So, yeah. I mean, we can't use them because we don't have the context to be able to use them, but that doesn't make them any more or less true.
Well, that is the purview of science, to pursue material truth.
And what if there are truths that science does not have access to?
Then they're probably not material.
Okay, but that doesn't make them any less true.
Then you test, does it work?
What if it doesn't matter whether it works for us? What if it works on some level that is beyond our utility?
Then it's still true. It still works.
Okay, but we can't prove that in any way.
No, we can watch and see if these other...
What if we can't watch it?
Quote-unquote entities, if it works, well, then it doesn't fall under truth. It can't be falsifiable. You're now in unfalsifiable territory, which means it doesn't matter what, it can't be called truth. It can't be called false.
I'm talking about something that is so far beyond our access. It doesn't mean that it's not true, but it is so far beyond our access that we have no connection to it. We can't observe it. It doesn't operate on the same planes that we operate on.
Then pragmatism is not in any way concerned with it.
Okay, but that doesn't make it any less true, and we're talking about defining truth.
Well, as I said, this is the pragmatist definition of truth.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Now, because see, the way that I define truth, that's part of it. That's one way that I do define it, and that's useful. That's the utility. That's the utilitarian view of things, the pragmatic truth. So it's like, I generally break it up into two different definitions, and maybe there's a third that I need to do this with. But you have what I consider objective truth and subjective truth. So we'll start with subjective. Well, actually, no, let's start with objective.
That's easier to define.
Because, yeah, I was thinking it was easier to define. But it's also more complicated, so let's start with subjective.
If we sound a bit off, we both have colds right now.
Yeah, and also I've been drinking a bit. But both of those things are true. So
allegedly.
we're going to start with subjective. So with subjective truth, we're talking about things like, and this is one of those, I'll define it first. So with subjective truth, we're talking about things like preference. So, maybe you think one band is better than another band, or some song is better than another song, or it's all those things that fall under the purview of preference. Now, like we were talking about before we started recording, maybe you can make an argument, and I've tried to do this at times when I'm particularly ornery, that there is a craft to music. Just extending that music example, there's a craft to music, or a craft as an illustrator. I can say this: there's a craft to illustration, there's a craft to animation, there's a craft to music.
What do you mean by craft?
There's an understanding of human psychology to a certain extent when you're engaging in those types of activities, when you're making music, when you're making art in general.
Is it a rule set?
Yes, I think so. But here's where it gets tricky, without getting into a whole new What is Art episode, which is the longest episode we've ever done. But there is
Coming to a podcast near you.
yeah, there is a rule set, but that rule set is broad and it's not consistent because people have different predilections toward different, like their personality traits give them different predilections toward different types of content. Right, so when genre is actually a really good example of this, that can concretize what we're talking about, because some people like sci-fi and some people like Western and some people like, straight drama, or some people like horror, blah, blah, blah,
And
blah,
some
blah.
people exclusively watch porn.
And some people exclusively apparently watch porn. But yeah, each one of those genres has a craft to it, right? I mean, it has rules that you abide by in order to properly create something that exists within that genre.
True mastery is knowing when to break those
Yeah.
rules without ruining the project.
Exactly. So you're still following a certain rule set. If you abandon rules in art, the way that some people suggest that we should, you might end up with something good, but I'd wager that if you broke it down, it's because it's hitting on some of these same rules in maybe a new and creative way, and that's why it's working. So yeah, when I say that there's hard and fast rules, it's like there are hard and fast rules, but it's more like a multivariate pantheon or whatever.
They're soft and slow rules
of different rule sets.
You can break these rules without losing.
Well,
that's what. Without diving too much into semantics, hard and fast to me is you do not break this, and they quickly catch up with you.
Okay, fair enough. Because what I'm thinking is the way I was thinking is that there are hard and fast rules for doing horror.
Flaccid and sloppy rules.
Yeah, there are hard and fast rules for horror. There are hard and fast rules for punk music. I mean, there are established rules and tropes and things like that, and you need to know what those are in order to be able to make something that... Okay, so at the bottom of this, not to get too deep into this, at the bottom of this is that you're trying to communicate something, right? That's what art is. Generally, it's trying to communicate something relatively complicated. And in order to do that, you have to understand the structure that you're working within. So if you're trying to communicate something that is a horror film, you need to understand what rules apply to the genre of horror film so that other people who are going to engage in what you've created understand it as that thing, even if it breaks those rules. Mm-hmm. So using that and taking it back to this idea of subjective truth, it's like there is subjective truth, and it has to do with preference, because what is the truth can change depending on what your preferences are. And it doesn't make it any more or less true just because one person thinks this way and another person thinks that way, because it's in that realm of preference. But so that's subjective truth. Another maybe even more concrete way to think about subjective truth is...
Concrete and subjective don't really jive in my brain.
Well, honesty.
Okay.
Because you can be honest, and that is true, but you're still wrong. Mm-hmm. Your honesty is true because you legitimately do believe that something is a certain way, and there is a truth to that. But you can still be wrong about that. So I still think that there is a subjective truth element to that, even if you can be wrong, because it's based on your understanding. You are being honest even though you're not presenting the truth.
Truth is what is.
We're getting to that. So those are the two ways that I think it's easiest to break down subjective truth. So now we're going to jump into objective truth. To me, this seems really simple, but I found that it's difficult to explain to people. Objective truth is whatever the state of things are outside of any observation of it. Like there's the way that reality exists on its own, however it operates, whether it's accessible to us or not.
Does truth need proof?
No.
How is it different from faith?
Because with faith, you could be wrong. With truth, you may not know it, but it's right.
Okay.
That's the difference. With faith, starts with the individual. You can't have faith without the individual. That is a individualistic activity. Faith is. Truth is whatever. It's almost the exact opposite of that in a sense. Mm-hmm. It's whatever the state of things is. Period. regardless of the way you experience it, regardless of your observation of it, regardless of anyone's observation of it. It's whatever the state of reality is, and I know you've said that for you reality has different connotations, but maybe for other people the term the universe might be more useful. Whatever, to me that seems more limiting, but I think we understand what I mean by it.
I hope so.
Yeah, whatever the universe is, whatever state it is in at any given time for any reason, however it operates, that is the truth. It doesn't matter whether or not we can observe it with science or whatever tools we have to observe it with. If it's beyond our access, it doesn't matter. It's still true. I'm not anthropocentric when it comes to truth. I don't think you can be.
So, how does one know the truth?
Well, here's the issue. I'm not entirely convinced that we can know the truth beyond some kind of divine intervention. And the reason I say that is because we are limited to a particular perspective.
All right, Descartes.
We are limited to a particular perspective. We can't leave it. We have no faculty. We have no way of leaving the individual perspective. And there are people that look at that and they end up in solipsism, or they end up in that idea that maybe everything is a figment of their imagination. You can go to extremes with it.
If you can't leave that, what use is empathy?
If you can't, well, I mean, what use is empathy? It's based in faith.
Yeah, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But empathy is, when you boil it down, really trying to see things from someone else's perspective outside of your own.
Yeah.
You may fail at it.
Yeah.
But you are attempting, and you may even succeed at it.
Mm-hmm. That's a matter
of you're saying that no one can experience something out of their own personal perspective, which means
not fully.
Empathy doesn't exist.
No, it exists. It does exist. It is elusive, but I wouldn't call it an illusion. Because you can. This is where maybe the pragmatic truth that we were talking about earlier comes in. You can practice it. You can say, okay, well, I have empathy for the way that this person's feeling, and if we have a conversation about it, and I can clearly see that they are identifying with it through that conversation, I can see their reactions and the way that they talk, and they're telling me, yeah, you're the way you're describing it, that's what it feels like. That's it. Then the best you can do is that. And you have to be satisfied with the pragmatic subjective truth. There's no way around that. It's just a matter of being satisfied. It's a matter of faith. You've heard me make this argument before where it's like, if you're going to talk about truth, you can't talk about faith outside of divine intervention, because you're not going to know what the truth is outside of divine intervention, not the objective truth. You don't have the faculties for it. You're not built for it. Period. No way of getting around it. But you can use your ability to access subjective truth on a large scale across the experiences of more than just yourself to give you that leap of faith to say, okay, look, I don't think that we're getting into solipsism a bit here. I don't think that I am intelligent enough or reasonable enough to have created all of this out of thin air. I had to have been born into this, because this is the context for my ability to communicate the ideas necessary to think that I might have created all this is entirely dependent on the fact that I was born into something that allowed me to do that. It's a chicken and egg situation maybe, but it seems absurd to me to try and say that solipsism makes any sense at all when you require the context of the environment that you're born within in order to be able to criticize that environment.
So,
or communicate anything.
Outside of the pragmatic definition of truth, because we established that okay, fair enough. Can one know what is not true? If
yes.
One cannot know the difference between truth and untruth, how do you know something is not? If you can't point at something and say this is true, how can you know something is not true?
I think it's easier to identify when something is not true, but at the same time, that's entirely a pragmatic issue, so far as I can tell. Because you have to, in order to be able to say that something isn't true, basically what that means is that you haven't had the experience, because everything's experiential, there's no way getting around that. But you haven't had the experience, and no matter how many times you test your hypothesis, it never works out. Something like, we'll do something simple. No matter how many times anybody has ever said, and I've had this experience, believe it or not, no matter how many times anybody has ever said they could fly on will alone. I've had this conversation with somebody who tried to convince me that they could fly on will alone if they just believed in themselves enough. Like, it doesn't, no. No. I can even take your word for it, but I have no faith in you, and I'd be willing to bet.
I believe you're being honest. But
you may be honest, but it's not the truth.
Right.
That's my wager. I can't say for sure, to be fair. But certainly if I were a betting man, I'd say you try to jump off that building, you're going to fall. And you're going to probably die, depending on how high that building is. But, yeah. So,
see, the trick to that one is you take the bet there. You're going to win that.
Oh, yeah, you got to take it first.
You have to have a sidebar where how much mass gets splattered on the car. And everyone takes a bet, and then you skim off that one. That's how you actually win that. That's being pragmatic.
I think the point that we're really trying to get at is we can't necessarily know objective truth. I'm not entirely convinced that we can, but
we can know objective untruths.
It certainly seems to be easier to know objective untruths, and that's when you get into that idea of, I may not be able to tell the truth, but I can be honest, and it's the best we can do. The best we can do is to be honest, to speak whatever it is that we cautiously and warily speak whatever it is that we know to be the case or we think to be the case, and then to have the humility to be able to change those things as we're presented with information that seems to counter that. So with objective truth, the way that I look at objective truth is if you're going to try and get to the core of it, of what it actually is, it's like what I was talking about earlier. It's whatever the state of things is, however it is, regardless. And we've talked about this with Kant and with some other philosophies where, it's that idea of things per se or things in themselves. The truth is reality in itself. That's the way I tend to define it. It's whatever the state of things is in spite of whatever it is on its own, reality in itself. It's the state of things in spite of any observation of it.
The noumenal teapot.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. The noumenal reality is truth. That's the way I define it. So the faculties that we have as human beings don't allow us the broadest access to what that is.
Yeah,
and it's impossible to know how much access it does give us to that.
We have senses that were not developed to seek truth. They were developed to keep us alive.
Yeah, and sometimes that means lying to us intentionally.
Yeah,
from the ground up.
Yeah, perceptual filters are rather important.
Yeah,
some people claim, I would love to have a perfect photogenic memory. I guarantee you would not. Because you're
plagued by understanding the lies of the people around you. That's the first thought that I have. Because they're not going to be very accepting when you can say, no, I can promise you, as a matter of fact, I have a photogenic memory that did not happen the way that you're saying that it did. And they're not going to believe you. Doesn't matter.
And it's not just... I said photogenic as if it just applies to sight, but to remember every detail of your entire existence. I think the birth trauma may be lethal.
Really? You think the birth trauma?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure there's a reason that babies don't remember that.
I could see it being traumatic, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, but everybody goes through that. It's, what it is. You can identify all the little details of it.
Do you want to be able to identify all the details inside your mom's vagina? I don't.
I don't care.
I don't. I don't want
to me, that's one of those, like, this is a natural thing. My mother has a vagina. She is a woman. She had sex. And I know that because I was born.
Do you want to go learn what it feels like? You don't remember.
To be born through my mother?
Well, you don't know you don't remember what your mom's vagina feels like. Do you want to go find out and just kind of put your hand up her skirt? That's
a really different situation than birth.
Yeah. But
would I want to go back as an adult and slip through that canal again? No. No, I would not. But does it bother me that that happened? No.
No, it
and if
doesn't
I had
bother me that it
memories of
happened,
it,
but I'm more comfortable with not having remembered it.
I don't think it would bother me that much if I did remember it. To me, it just seems too natural for me to really be all that bothered by it. But
the absolute, just complete world shift. Because until you're born, Kat and I were talking about this after Acer was born. Prior to being birthed, your entire universe is a dark, wet, throbbing, singular point of consciousness.
yeah.
You may have some understanding that you got some wiggly bits. You don't know anything else.
There are some noises.
And then suddenly, you're squeezed through a tight tube. And then it's very cold outside.
Yeah.
And you are looking at things that, in distances you couldn't have even comprehended a second ago. And that's assuming you're born in a delivery room that's maybe 20 feet by 20 feet.
Yeah.
It's probably good that we can't comprehend that. The absolute shift in what reality is from one thing to another.
Okay, maybe this
from
is
1 minute or from 1 second to another, and then you can't breathe.
Right. Okay, that would be bad. But maybe this is strange to you. But the way you described it actually made me want to remember it more.
Nah, that's the difference between you and I. I don't want to remember that. I'm glad knowing that it happened. I don't need to experience that. And you have no frame of reference. None.
No, but that excites me. I like that. I like being able to see those situations and see how it grew into something else. Like I don't think I would be traumatized by that. I think I'd be in awe of it. I think I'd be amazed by it, appreciative of it, even, that kind of stuff. But yeah, so we're running out of time here. But when it comes to being able to define truth, I think that's where people get tripped up, because I personally think there are too many people who don't acknowledge that however they define truth, there is some version of it that is beyond what they are capable of perceiving. And I think that's an idea that a lot of people struggle with. I understand that, but
I'm okay with having a 0.
What do you mean?
I'm not going to definitively say there are no things, at least in the material universe, that we have no chance of understanding. Are there things that are not that do not deal with materialism that we will never understand? Yeah, sure, probably. But I'm not going to say definitively one way or the other.
We can't know, but
because humans have a pretty good track record of building tools to
observe things that they can't observe with their own sense organs, yeah. And that's fair enough. But I do believe, and again, this is a matter of belief, to be fair, because I can't prove it, but I think it is, to me, the odds that there is a version of the universe that we exist in that we cannot and may never have the faculties to perceive is astronomical. It seems to me that is likely the case. We have the universe or reality, or however you wanted to define it or describe it, that we are capable of perceiving based on our senses.
Why do you believe that is the case?
Why do I believe that it's likely that there is a reality? There are elements of reality that we can never experience.
Yes,
or observe.
You typically operate off of at least some evidence-based reasoning. You're not one to give it a think and then say, "Yeah, I think that's the case." You and have that belief. There's the entertaining hypothesis, and then there's, as you put it, belief.
Yeah.
So, what gave you that belief?
Probably a culmination of experiences that I've had. It's like I've experienced things that are so far on the edge of tolerable perception, we'll say, that it's almost inconceivable to me to think that there is nothing beyond that. I think to me, it seems likely inevitable. You can tell I'm being very careful with my language here. Likely inevitable that that we live in a universe or a reality, however you want to define it, which has properties that we can access through our sense organs and through instruments that we can develop to, because
Observe might be a better.
observe might be better, because here's the thing: we aren't going to build an instrument to observe something we have no sense that exists. We have to have some sense that it exists in order to build a. Now, sense may be a misguiding word here. We have to have a concept that there is this thing that exists that we can't observe with our current instruments in order to build an instrument to observe it. We aren't just going to build. We have to have context. We aren't just going to build some random instrument to maybe perceive something or observe something that may be out there. Like, we just don't do that. It's like there's something here in science. It's mostly there's something here that we're not able to calculate, and so there must be something there that we're not able to observe. So with the tools we have currently. So let's figure out what it seems to be based on, and then try and build some kind of tool to observe that thing. We have to have context in order to build a tool to observe the thing that we think might be there. If we don't have any concept that there might be a thing there to observe, we have no basis to build an instrument to observe it.
Okay, except we have built instruments to observe a specific phenomenon that we believe that are conceptual, and those things don't show up. So that's probably not it. We're
What do you
back
mean?
to square one. I can't remember the name of the experiment. It's the most successful failure of an experiment in history.
Is it because one of the things I was thinking of as I was saying that this might be that situation where it's like we built an instrument to observe one thing, and then we found out a whole bunch of other shit in the process of trying to figure out that one thing, and maybe that one thing was wrong, but we discovered a whole bunch of other shit.
Yeah, and
Okay.
it expands our ability to conceive of different things. So for every failed experiment, well, there's still the mystery there, and we know that's not it.
Yeah.
And then, you have to go to square one and try again.
Okay, so
And
maybe that's part of the faith that I have. Before I forget, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I don't want to forget my train of thought here. Maybe that's part of that, of answering that question that you had for me, is that the fact that has happened so many times, and we've experienced that, where we keep finding out new things basically by happenstance. That to me is an indication that there are so many things. It goes back to that Shakespeare line, that Hamlet line. There are more things on heaven and earth, dear Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Right? I love that line because that really gets to the heart of this issue. It's like we're surprised so often by the things that we didn't know we could observe that it seems highly unlikely to me that there aren't things out there that we don't have the faculties to observe and can never develop the tools to observe, because we are so far removed from being able to access the context that we don't even know where to begin to observe those things.
Are you familiar with
It's the unknown unknowns.
Are you familiar with the hard problem of consciousness?
I've heard it so many times, that I feel guilty that I don't remember the details of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, unlike traveling to Mars or maybe even building FTL, it's like we have some place to start, at least with that. The hard problem of consciousness is perhaps the hardest problem humanity will ever face.
My understanding of it is that it's the issue of not being able to figure out exactly what consciousness is and how it's manifested.
Well,
yeah.
You like chocolate, right?
Yes.
Okay. When you eat a bar of chocolate, do you see the chemical structure of chocolate pop up into your eye like a Terminator HUD?
Not usually. How much weed have I smoked?
Not enough? Too much.
Clearly not enough. Perhaps too much.
Perhaps. So how does, and this is the hard problem, how does a brain made of meat take electrical impulses and turn it into experience. Because you don't experience chocolate as a
Breakdown of chemicals and all that
right.
stuff. Yeah,
You experience its sweetness.
it's translated through the senses in some to some degree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you were to try and look at orange without having any concept of orange, you don't see it as a as wavelengths and the nanometers being broadcast into your brain.
No.
It's orange, but orange doesn't exist. Orange is not real.
No, it is.
Nominally, maybe.
No, I would say the opposite. Phenomenally, it exists. Yeah. Nominally, maybe not.
Because we can describe it.
Right.
Nominally, it does not. There is no orange.
Mm-hmm. Well, not the way we experience
we
it.
see a wavelength that our brain, that the meat turns into the qualia of orange.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is the hard problem of consciousness.
That's not that weird to me.
I don't know if we'll be able to crack that one.
That's not that weird to me. It seems like we're dancing around the fact of perception. All it's doing is it's translating phenomena into experience. That's not a weird. I remember this
We have no
now.
concept of where to start looking for that. We can see that neurons light up, and we can describe the physical process of it. We cannot describe how that process becomes perception. Because to try and look at that through the tools that we have, science is purely material. It is not concerned with anything outside the material. So you are boiling this down, at least in this situation, between materialism and we'll call it fundamentalism, where there's a fundamental portion of reality that we can describe everything about it, but we can't tell you why it's happening. We can tell you what's happening. We can't tell you the why. That is if we crack that, I'm going to be far more optimistic. And I'm already optimistic. Like another good one, and yes, I am ripping off Exerbia on this. But do you get the after you eat asparagus, the really bad pea scent?
Pea scent?
Yeah.
No.
About half the population has a gene that experiences asparagus metabolites as one of the worst smells in their life. So they don't eat asparagus because every time they pee after eating asparagus, it smells like Hell's Kitchen threw up on them.
Okay, so it's just another version of like the whole one I'm more familiar with is the whole cilantro tastes like soap thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't have that gene, that you experience the cilantro soap or the asparagus butthole scent, you can become the material expert. You can know everything there is to know about the material experience and what happens in your body, but you will never know the qualia. You will never have the experience.
Yeah. Well, you can understand it through
outside of genetic engineering.
Well, I was saying by having a bunch of people who do experience it, you can gather information, you can find the commonalities between those two things, and it's not going to be it's empirical evidence.
At best, you can get an approximation.
Yeah, but your approximation can be pretty damn close if you have a large enough sample size.
It's not going to be the same thing, though.
That's not going to be the same thing as experiencing the qualia, but the commonalities between those descriptions of what it's like can be so damned accurate that it's true enough. We've used that phrase before. It's true enough to continue, if you were so inclined. It's true enough to continue experience. Yeah, it's true enough to continue experimenting with that knowledge, and you're likely to get the results that you're expecting to a degree because you have enough feedback.
You'll be able to tell people what other people says this smells like.
Yeah.
That's the best you can do.
If you're talking about the qualia, yeah. Yeah,
And
I mean, if you're strictly dealing with the qualia, yeah.
So, the hard problem of consciousness. How does electrical impulses interface with meat to produce qualia?
I mean, I don't know the scientific answer to it, but it doesn't
No one does.
feel. It doesn't feel. This could just be my lack of really truly understanding the nuance of this problem, but it doesn't seem so strange to me that it feels like a big problem. You know what I mean?
It's a hard problem. Mm-hmm. It's one of the biggest mysteries in humanity, and it's within each of us. We are the mystery in this one, and maybe people don't see it as
To me,
one of the hardest, one of the biggest mysteries in science,
right?
because they are so close to it.
Well, I mean, to me, it just that wall that they're describing, that qualia wall, just seems to be the mechanism that we use to. It's the okay. Let's say this: it's the marriage between our ability to look at something as a phenomenal thing. So let's say the color orange, right? So there is physics and things involved. There's science involved in not science technically, but you know what I mean. In whatever that is, right? You're talking about the wavelengths and all that stuff, right? So you've got that aspect of it, and we take that, and then we apply meaning to it. To me, that's that's the problem of consciousness. It's just that movement from having the thing that we're observing through our senses and then applying meaning to it. When we say orange, that's applying meaning to it. Mm-hmm. We're taking something phenomenal or something noumenal, and through experiencing it empirically, we are applying meaning to it so that it has utility. If we're going to engage with it, we have to be able to call it something so that we can reference it.
But you still haven't described how electrical signals become orange.
Not not scientifically, no. I don't know. I mean, it's something I probably need to think about harder. But it up to this point, it doesn't seem wild to me. It almost seems like maybe, and I could be very very easily could be wrong about this. It seems like we're breaking down a system and looking for a problem that we think is there but may not be there. It's hard to describe what's kind of going on in my head when I'm thinking about that. But it's like we're breaking it down further than it needs to be broken down to understand it. Maybe that's what it is. I could be very, very wrong about that. But to me, it seems like that overlapping between perception and applying meaning seems to be a strong enough explanation. But
you can't apply meaning to something you can't interpret as orange.
Well, to be fair,
there is
I still can't give you an empirical can't give you an empirical explanation for that transfer.
Yeah, no one can.
Yeah,
no one even knows where to start looking at that.
Mm-hmm.
You can't assign meaning to something you can't experience. We experience it, though, and we don't know how we do that.
Yeah. Well, that's, I mean, most animals experience things in some manner, but the way we experience it that seems to differentiate us from them is the complexity of the meaning that we apply to things.
Deer don't experience orange. We don't know why.
No, I don't think dogs do either. I think cats do. Because they see, I think they see in a lot of red spectrum. There's a lot of reds and oranges and those types of things. I think, if I remember that right. But yeah,
I ain't no feline optometrist.
Feline optometrist.
So I think that hard problem of consciousness is about as if we can crack that one and break down the mechanism of it and the why of it, then I don't think there is a limit to how much truth humanity can learn.
Well, Garrett, you know what? I think we are in the unique position of two guys having a hard think about stuff.
Yes.
I think if we have a full episode about the hard problem of consciousness. We could crack this.
We can't.
I'm still going to add it to the list because it's a good conversation.
It's just two guys with some alcohol and a cat, and occasionally petting the cat.
Having a good think. Don't underestimate that. We're having a good think.
Yeah, we're having a good think.
All right. See, that portion alone was 25 minutes. So this is going to be a longer a la carte, but that's cool. All right. That is all we've got on the topic of truth for now. This is probably certainly a part 1. Part 2 is either going to be another a la carte or maybe a full episode, but I think we're good. All right. Well, we'll see you later, arbitrators. Hope you enjoyed that episode. We'll see you next time.
Bye.